The gunshot echoed through the desolate plains of western Texas, startling a flock of birds into flight as Olivia Zimmerman clutched her infant daughter tighter to her chest. Blood soaked through the sleeve of her once pristine dress, the wound in her arm burning like fire as she stumbled forward across the harsh landscape. Del Rio was still miles away, and night was falling fast over the unforgiving frontier. The year was 1876, and out here, a woman alone with a baby had little chance of survival. Olivia had been on the run for 3 days now, ever since her husband Thomas had been murdered by the Sutton Gang for refusing to sell their small ranch. They'd shot him right in front of her, then burned their home to the ground. She'd barely escaped with little Emma and the clothes on her back, fleeing into the wilderness with the killers in pursuit, determined to leave no witnesses. The wound in her arm came from a stray bullet when they'd caught up to her earlier that morning. She'd managed to lose them again in a narrow canyon, but knew they wouldn't stop hunting. Her vision was beginning to blur from blood loss and exhaustion. Her milk was drying up from stress, and Emma hadn't stopped crying for hours. When she spotted the thin wisp of campfire smoke rising above a copse of cottonwoods near the river bend, Olivia hesitated. It could be anyone, another outlaw, a drifter, or worse. But Emma was hungry, her small face red from crying, and Olivia was growing weaker by the minute. She had no choice. She approached cautiously, her feet barely able to carry her the last few yards. A tall figure stood by the fire, his back to her, tending to something in a cast iron skillet. A horse nickered softly from where it was tethered nearby. Olivia stumbled into the clearing, startling the man. He turned quickly, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver on his hip. In the firelight, she could make out a weathered face partially hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, piercing gray eyes assessing her with a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Please," Olivia gasped, her voice raw with desperation as she extended her arms, offering her bundled infant to the stranger. Blood dripped from her fingertips onto the dusty ground. "Save my baby." Then her legs gave way beneath her, and she collapsed at the edge of the firelight. Hunter Crawford had been riding the frontier for 15 years, ever since he was 18 years old. He'd seen his share of trouble, caused some of it himself in his younger days, but had never expected to have a bleeding woman collapse at his campfire with an infant in her arms. He moved quickly, catching the baby before it hit the ground as the woman fell. The infant wailed louder, tiny fists punching the air. Hunter awkwardly held the child while kneeling to check on the mother. She was still breathing, though her face was pale beneath the dirt and blood. "Madam." He patted her cheek gently. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of summer sage. "My baby," she whispered. "I've got the little one," Hunter assured her, showing her the bundle in his arm. "But you're bleeding bad. Let me help you to my bedroll." With surprising strength, she clutched his wrist. "They're coming. The Sutton Gang. They killed my husband." Her eyes closed again, her grip loosening. Hunter cursed under his breath. The Sutton Gang was bad news, violent outlaws who'd been terrorizing the border region between Texas and Mexico for the past 2 years. If they were hunting this woman and her child, they wouldn't stop until the job was finished. The baby continued to cry as Hunter managed to move the woman to his bedroll. He cut away the sleeve of her dress to reveal an ugly bullet wound that had torn through the flesh of her upper arm. It wasn't life-threatening if he could stop the bleeding and prevent infection, but she'd lost a lot of blood already. He cleaned the wound as best he could with whiskey from his saddlebag, wincing at her unconscious moan of pain. After bandaging her arm with strips torn from a clean shirt, he turned his attention to the wailing infant. "Now what am I supposed to do with you?" he muttered, awkwardly rocking the baby. The tiny face was scrunched up in misery, tears streaming down reddened cheeks. Hunter had never held a baby before, and he felt entirely out of his element. But as he looked at the unconscious mother and her defenseless child, something shifted inside him. These two needed protection, and they'd stumbled into his camp for a reason. He thought quickly. Del Rio was about 15 miles southwest, but traveling with a wounded woman and an infant would be slow going. The Sutton Gang could be anywhere, and if they were tracking her, his campfire would be like a beacon. The baby's cries increased in volume. "S-H-H, little one," he whispered, bouncing the child gently. "You're gonna bring those killers right to us." Hunter glanced at the woman again, noting her sunken cheeks and the dark circles under her eyes. She looked half-starved, which meant she probably wasn't producing enough milk for the infant. The baby needed food soon. He rummaged through his saddlebags until he found a clean bandana, which he soaked in water mixed with a little sugar from his supplies. Carefully, he let the infant suck on the corner of the damp cloth. It wasn't much, but it might soothe the child until they could find proper nourishment. To his relief, the baby quieted somewhat, tiny fingers clutching at the bandana. Looking down at the innocent face, Hunter felt a fierce protectiveness surge through him. This child and her mother were now his responsibility, at least until they were safe. He dampened another cloth and gently wiped the woman's forehead. She was burning with fever. "What's your name, madam?" he asked softly, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "What kind of trouble have you brought to my door?" The night deepened around them as Hunter kept watch, the revolver on his lap and his Winchester rifle within easy reach. Every rustle in the underbrush, every distant animal call made him tense, ears straining for the sound of approaching riders. The woman moaned in her fever dreams, occasionally calling out names Thomas and Emma. Hunter assumed Emma was the baby, which meant Thomas was likely the husband murdered by the Sutton Gang. Just before dawn, her eyes opened. She looked disoriented, struggling to sit up until she saw her baby nestled beside her. "Emma," she whispered, reaching for the child with her good arm. "Easy," Hunter cautioned. "You've lost a lot of blood. The little one's fine." The woman's eyes darted to him, wariness replacing relief. "Who are you?" Name's Hunter Crawford. "You stumbled into my camp last night bleeding and about to collapse. Asked me to save your baby." She pulled the infant closer, wincing at the pain in her injured arm. "Thank you for helping us, Mr. Crawford. Just Hunter is fine." He offered her his canteen. "You think you can drink?" she nodded, taking the canteen with trembling fingers. After a few sips, she seemed to gather her strength. "I'm Olivia Zimmerman. This is Emma. My husband Thomas and I had a small cattle ranch north of here." Had. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "The Sutton Gang wanted our land. It sits on a good water source and they've been buying or taking all the properties in the area. When Thomas refused to sell, they—" Her voice broke. Hunter nodded grimly. "I know their reputation. Been trouble since they crossed over from New Mexico territory. They burned everything," Olivia continued, her voice hollow. "I grabbed Emma and ran while they were setting fire to the barn. They've been hunting us for days." The baby began to fuss, tiny face scrunching in hunger. Olivia tried to nurse her, but after a few minutes she looked up at Hunter with despair. "My milk's almost gone. She's starving." Hunter turned away to give her privacy. "We need to get to Del Rio. You need a doctor, and the little one needs proper food." He began packing up his few belongings. "Can you ride?" "I can try," Olivia said, determination in her voice despite her weakened state. "We'll double up on my horse. It'll be slow going, but we should make it by midday if we leave now." As he saddled his stallion, a dun-colored Mustang he called Ranger, Hunter found himself stealing glances at the young mother. Despite her condition, there was a fierce strength about her. Her light brown hair, though tangled and dirty, caught the early morning light with hints of gold. She couldn't be more than 23 or 24. He guessed young to be widowed and on the run with an infant. "How old is Emma?" he asked as he helped Olivia to her feet. 4 months, she replied, cradling the baby against her chest. "She was born just after we finished building the ranch house." A shadow crossed her face. Thomas was so proud. He built her a cradle from cedar wood. Hunter nodded, not knowing what to say. He'd been a loner most of his life, drifting from job to job across the frontier, cowhand, scout, occasional bounty hunter. The settled life had never appealed to him, but he felt a pang for what this woman had lost. "The gang will be watching the main trails," he said, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. "We'll take the river route. It's longer but safer." Olivia nodded, leaning back slightly against his chest as he nudged Ranger into motion. The baby had quieted, lulled by the gentle rocking of the horse. They rode in silence for the first hour, Hunter constantly scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. The land was harsh but beautiful in the early morning light, rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and mesquite, the distant mountains purple against the lightening sky. "You're not from around here," Olivia observed eventually, her voice stronger than it had been. "Originally from Colorado Territory," Hunter replied, "been wandering ever since the war. You fought Confederate cavalry, was barely 18 when I joined up." He rarely spoke of those days. "And you don't sound like a Texan." "Ohio," Olivia said. "Thomas and I came west 2 years ago." He read about the cattle opportunities in the newspapers, said we could build something from nothing out here. Her voice caught. He was always full of big dreams. Hunter felt her shoulders shake slightly and knew she was crying, trying to hide it from him. He pretended not to notice, giving her the dignity of her grief. "My pa had dreams like that," he said after a while. "Wanted to build the biggest horse ranch in Colorado. Never quite managed it, but he taught me everything I know about horseflesh." "Is he still there? Your family?" Hunter shook his head, though she couldn't see the gesture. "Lost them all in '68, influenza." "I'm sorry," Olivia said softly. "It was a long time ago." But the ache never quite left him, especially on cold nights under the stars when memories seemed to press closer. They continued along the riverbank, the terrain growing rougher. Ranger picked his way carefully among the rocks, the movement jostling Olivia's injured arm. Hunter could feel her tense with pain, but she never complained. When the sun climbed higher, he stopped in a shady grove to rest the horse and check Olivia's wound. The bandage was spotted with fresh blood, and her skin felt hot to the touch. "Fever's getting worse," he muttered, rewrapping the injury with the last of his clean cloth. "We need to get you to a doctor soon." Emma began to cry again, her tiny face red with hunger and discomfort. Olivia tried to comfort her, but her own strength was flagging. "Here," Hunter said, reaching for his saddlebag. He pulled out a small tin of condensed milk he'd been saving for his coffee. "It's not ideal, but it might help for now." He mixed some with water in his tin cup, then tore another clean strip from his spare shirt to soak in the diluted milk. Olivia looked dubious, but allowed him to demonstrate how Emma could suck the liquid from the cloth. "You've done this before?" she asked, surprised when the baby eagerly accepted the makeshift bottle. Hunter shook his head. "Just remembered something my ma used to do for calves that lost their mothers." He looked away, suddenly embarrassed. "Different, I know, but the principle seemed sound." Olivia smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Despite the dirt and exhaustion on her face, it transformed her features, revealing dimples in her cheeks and a warmth in her eyes that made something twist in Hunter's chest. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." Before he could respond, Ranger suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward. Hunter immediately tensed, hand moving to his revolver. "What is it?" Olivia whispered, clutching Emma closer. "Not sure. Ranger senses something." He stood slowly, scanning their surroundings. The river gurgled peacefully beside them. Birds called in the trees, but something had disturbed the horse. Then he heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Multiple riders approaching from the north. "Quickly," he urged, helping Olivia to her feet. "We need to move." "Is it them?" Fear widened her eyes. "Can't be sure, but we're not waiting to find out." He lifted her onto Ranger's back, then handed Emma up to her before mounting behind them. "Hold tight." They set off at a faster pace, abandoning the relative safety of the riverbank for a more direct route toward Del Rio. Hunter knew they were taking a risk by moving into open country, but speed was now more important than stealth. As they crested a small hill, he glanced back and saw dust rising in the distance. 4 or 5 riders, moving fast. "They've found us," Olivia gasped, following his gaze. Hunter urged Ranger to a gallop, but the horse was tiring under the weight of 3 riders. The pursuers were gaining ground. "There's a line shack ahead," Hunter said, remembering the landscape from previous journeys. "Used by the Bar T Ranch hands during Roundup. We might be able to hold them off there." Olivia nodded, clutching Emma tightly with one arm while her other hand gripped the saddle horn. The baby was wailing now, frightened by the jolting pace. They reached the abandoned line shack just as the riders appeared on the horizon behind them. Hunter helped Olivia and Emma inside, then quickly led Ranger around back out of sight. The shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a single window and door. A rough bunk stood against one wall, and a small iron stove occupied one corner, though there was no wood for a fire. Dust and cobwebs covered everything. "Stay back from the window," Hunter instructed, checking his Winchester's ammunition. He had the rifle, his revolver, and about 40 rounds total, not enough for a prolonged fight against 5 armed men. "What are we going to do?" Olivia asked, her face pale but composed as she tried to soothe the crying infant. "Try to reason with them first," Hunter replied, though he had little hope of that working. "If that fails, I'll hold them off while you slip out the back with Emma. Ranger can carry you both to Del Rio." Olivia shook her head firmly. "I won't leave you to die for us." "You have your daughter to think about," Hunter countered, peering cautiously out the window. The riders were approaching slowly now, spreading out to surround the shack. "We both know they'll hunt me down before I make it halfway to town," Olivia said quietly. "Our only chance is together." Before Hunter could argue further, a voice called out from outside. "We know you're in there, woman. Send out the cowboy, and we might let you live long enough to see your baby grow teeth." Hunter recognized the voice from descriptions he'd heard Jake Sutton himself, the leader of the gang. He exchanged a glance with Olivia, who had gone even paler. "That's him," she whispered. "The one who shot Thomas." Hunter moved to the door, keeping to the side to avoid presenting a target. "What do you want with the woman and her child, Sutton? They're no threat to you." A harsh laugh answered him. "No witnesses, Cowboy, that's just good business. Besides, the lady saw something she shouldn't have when we visited her ranch." Hunter looked questioningly at Olivia. "They had army wagons," she said softly. "They're stealing government supplies and selling them to outlaws across the border. Thomas found out and was going to report them to the Rangers." The pieces fell into place for Hunter. This wasn't just about a water rights dispute. The Zimmerman ranch must have been on a smuggling route the Sutton Gang was using. "You've got 30 seconds to send them out or we're coming in shooting," Sutton called. Hunter turned to Olivia. "Is there anything in here we can use? Anything at all?" She glanced around frantically, then pointed to a loose floorboard near the stove. "Maybe there." Hunter pried it up to find a small space beneath. Inside was a canvas pouch containing matches, jerky, and to his immense relief a box of ammunition and an old Colt revolver. "Ranch hands emergency cash," he murmured, checking the gun. It was loaded and in decent condition. He handed it to Olivia. "You know how to use this," she nodded grimly. "Thomas taught me, said a frontier wife should know how to protect herself." "Time's up," Sutton shouted. Boys lighted up, gunfire erupted, bullets splintering through the thin wooden walls. Hunter pushed Olivia and Emma toward the relative safety of the corner behind the iron stove, then took position by the window. He returned fire methodically, conserving ammunition while trying to keep the attackers at bay. A bullet grazed his arm, tearing through his sleeve and drawing blood. He barely noticed, focused on the men who were trying to work their way closer to the shack. "They're going to try to burn us out," he warned Olivia. "It's what they do." As if confirming his words, a flaming arrow arced through the air, landing on the roof with a thud. Within seconds, the dry wood began to smolder. Emma was screaming now, terrified by the noise and the acrid smell of smoke. Olivia huddled over her protectively, the revolver clutched in her trembling hand. Hunter managed to hit one of the gang members, sending him sprawling in the dust. The others pulled back temporarily, giving them a moment's respite. "We can't stay here," he said, glancing at the spreading fire above them. Smoke was beginning to fill the small space. "When I give the word, we make for Ranger. I'll cover you." Olivia nodded, gathering Emma close. Her eyes met Hunter's, and in them he saw not just fear, but a fierce determination that matched his own growing resolve. In the short time he'd known her, he'd come to admire her courage and resilience. He wasn't going to let these outlaws harm her or her child. "Ready?" he asked, reloading his Winchester. "Ready," she confirmed, rising to a crouch. Hunter fired rapidly out the window and door, forcing the Sutton Gang to take cover. "Now!" They burst from the rear of the shack, Hunter shielding Olivia and Emma with his body as they ran for where Ranger was tethered. Bullets kicked up dust around their feet, but they reached the horse unscathed. Hunter boosted Olivia into the saddle, then swung up behind her just as Jake Sutton appeared around the corner of the burning building. The outlaw raised his pistol, but Hunter was faster, firing a shot that caught Sutton in the shoulder, spinning him backward. "Hang on," Hunter urged, spurring Ranger into a gallop. They thundered away from the shack, bullets whining past them as the remaining gang members gave chase. "They're following," Olivia cried over her shoulder. Hunter had expected nothing less. The terrain ahead was open, offering little cover, but he knew these lands better than the Sutton Gang did. There was a maze of ravines to the southeast that could provide them an advantage. He guided Ranger toward the broken ground, pushing the loyal horse to its limits. The ravines appeared ahead, a network of dry washes and gullies carved by seasonal floods. Hunter directed the horse into the labyrinth, taking sharp turns and doubling back to confuse their pursuers. The sound of hoofbeats behind them grew more distant, then faded entirely. Still, Hunter pushed on, unwilling to take chances with Olivia and Emma's safety. Only when Ranger began to show signs of exhaustion did he finally slow their pace, finding shelter in a deep arroyo with high walls that would hide them from view. As they dismounted, Olivia stumbled, weakened by blood loss and the strain of their escape. Hunter caught her before she fell, supporting her weight as he helped her sit against the arroyo wall. Emma had finally exhausted herself into silence, sleeping fitfully in her mother's arms. "Let me check your wound," Hunter said, gently unwrapping the blood-soaked bandage. The bullet gash was angry and inflamed, the skin around it hot to the touch. "The fever's getting worse. We need to find help soon." Olivia nodded weakly. How far are we from Del Rio now? About 5 miles, but we need to rest Ranger first and make sure we've lost the Sutton Gang for good. He offered her water from his canteen, then dampened a cloth to cool her forehead. As he tended to her, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. They had faced death together and survived, forging a bond that went beyond mere circumstance. "Why are you helping us?" Olivia asked softly. "You could have sent us away when I stumbled into your camp. You didn't have to risk your life." Hunter considered the question as he rebandaged her arm. Why indeed? He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, keeping to himself as he drifted across the frontier. Yet when this woman and her child appeared, something had awakened in him, a protective instinct, yes, but also a longing he'd buried long ago. "Couldn't turn away someone in need," he said simply. "Especially not a baby." Olivia studied his face, seeming to sense there was more to his answer. "You're a good man, Hunter Crawford. There aren't many who would do what you've done for strangers." "Not strangers anymore," he replied, surprising himself with the words. He cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable with the emotion swelling in his chest. "You should rest while you can. We'll move again when Ranger's recovered." She nodded, her eyelids already drooping with exhaustion. Within minutes, both she and Emma were asleep, leaving Hunter alone with his thoughts. He kept watch from the edge of the arroyo, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit while contemplating the strange turn his life had taken in the past 24 hours. Just yesterday, he'd been a solitary drifter with no responsibilities beyond himself. Now he was protector to a woman and child, hunted by outlaws, with no clear plan beyond reaching Del Rio. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. These two vulnerable lives depended on him, and he found he didn't mind the responsibility. More than that, he was beginning to care for them in a way that both alarmed and exhilarated him. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Hunter checked on Olivia again. Her fever seemed to have stabilized, though she was still too warm. Emma had awakened and was fussing quietly, hungry again. They would need to find food for both of them soon. Hunter gathered what little they had left: some jerky, a few biscuits from his saddlebag, and the remains of the condensed milk. It would have to do until they reached town. He roused Olivia gently. "We should move while there's still light. Think you can ride?" She nodded, accepting his help to stand. "I'm feeling a little stronger." It wasn't entirely convincing, but her determination was evident. Hunter mixed the last of the condensed milk with water for Emma, using the cloth method again to feed her. The baby seemed less satisfied than before, but stopped crying long enough for them to prepare to leave. As Hunter helped Olivia mount Ranger, he noticed her studying his face with an odd expression. "What is it?" he asked. "I just realized I don't know anything about you," she said. "Except your name and that you're from Colorado." Hunter shrugged as he swung up behind her. "Not much else to tell. I'm 33 years old, been drifting since after the war, doing whatever work I can find. Was heading to Mexico for the winter when you found me. No family. No one waiting for you somewhere." He shook his head. "Not anymore." The simple admission hung between them as they set off toward Del Rio. Hunter guided Ranger out of the ravines and back onto more level ground, always alert for signs of the Sutton Gang. But the land remained peaceful around them, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Ranger's hooves and Emma's occasional whimpers. By the time the sun touched the western horizon, the outskirts of Del Rio came into view. The small border town was nestled along the Rio Grande, its adobe and wooden buildings glowing golden in the late afternoon light. Relief washed through Hunter at the sight. They had made it. "We'll find the doctor first," he told Olivia, "then get rooms at the hotel." You'll both be safe there while I alert the sheriff about the Sutton Gang." Olivia leaned back against him, her head resting briefly on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need," Hunter replied gruffly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just doing what anyone would." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. What you did was extraordinary." Before he could respond, they were entering the town proper, drawing curious stares from residents as they made their way down the main street. A woman riding double with a rugged cowboy, clutching a baby, all of them dusty and blood-stained. It was quite a sight for the small community. Hunter directed Ranger to the doctor's office, a neat whitewashed building with a shingle proclaiming Dr. James Monroe, physician and surgeon. He dismounted quickly, then helped Olivia down, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a graying beard, took one look at them and ushered them inside without question. He settled Olivia on his examining table while Hunter explained their situation in brief terms. "Bullet wound, 3 days old, fever started yesterday," he concluded. "The baby needs proper nourishment too." Dr. Monroe nodded, already examining Olivia's arm. "Mrs. Peterson," he called to an older woman who appeared to be his assistant, "please prepare a bottle for the infant and send Billy for Sheriff Taylor. He'll want to hear about the Sutton Gang." As Mrs. Peterson took Emma to the adjoining room to be fed, Olivia caught Hunter's hand. "Don't leave," she pleaded, her eyes wide with fear. "I'll stay right here," he promised, squeezing her fingers gently. The doctor cleaned and treated the wound with practiced efficiency, administering laudanum for the pain before stitching the worst parts closed. "The bullet just grazed you," he told Olivia, "but infection has set in. You'll need to rest completely for several days, and I'll give you medicine for the fever." Olivia nodded weakly, the laudanum already making her drowsy. "Emma, your baby is fine," Dr. Monroe assured her. "Mrs. Peterson is an excellent nurse and has raised 6 children of her own. She knows just what to do." As if to confirm his words, Mrs. Peterson returned with Emma, who looked considerably happier after being properly fed. The older woman placed the content infant beside Olivia on the examining table. "She's a beautiful child," Mrs. Peterson said warmly. "Took to the bottle like she was born to it. She'll be just fine." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she stroked Emma's cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. The doctor turned to Hunter. "She needs rest now. The hotel has clean rooms and I can check on her there tomorrow." Hunter nodded, then tensed as the door opened to admit a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a sheriff's star. Sheriff Taylor was known throughout the region as a fair but tough lawman. His weathered face registered surprise when he recognized Hunter. "Crawford, thought you'd left these parts." "Hello, Taylor," Hunter replied cautiously. The two men had a history not entirely friendly, but based on mutual respect. "Was on my way to Mexico when I got sidetracked." The sheriff's eyes moved to Olivia and Emma, then back to Hunter with a raised eyebrow. "Not what you're thinking," Hunter said quickly. "Mrs. Zimmerman here and her daughter are running from the Sutton Gang. They killed her husband and burned their ranch north of here." Sheriff Taylor's expression darkened. "The Suttons have been a thorn in my side for months. Been trying to get enough evidence to go after them properly." He approached Olivia. "Madam, I'm sorry for your loss. If you're willing to make a statement once you're recovered, it would help me build a case against them." Olivia nodded. "I'll tell you everything I know. They're not just land thieves, they're smuggling government supplies across the border. I saw the wagons myself." This clearly interested the sheriff. That would explain a few things. The Army's been missing shipments between Fort Clark and Fort Duncan. "They're still out there," Hunter interjected. 4 of them, maybe more. They followed us almost to town. I'll send deputies to patrol the outskirts, Sheriff Taylor promised. And I'll wire Fort Duncan for military support. If what Mrs. Zimmerman says is true, the Army will want to be involved. He studied Hunter again, his expression unreadable. You planning to stay around, Crawford? I'll need your statement, too. Hunter glanced at Olivia, who was watching him with an unspoken question in her eyes. He told her he was heading to Mexico, and that had been his plan. But now, I'll be here, he said finally. At least until Mrs. Zimmerman and her daughter are safe. The sheriff nodded, seeming satisfied. Good. I'll find you tomorrow for that statement. With a tip of his hat to Olivia, he departed. Dr. Monroe finished wrapping Olivia's arm in clean bandages. You can take her to the hotel now, he told Hunter. The Riverside has the cleanest rooms. Ask for Mrs. Daniels, she'll take good care of them. Hunter thanked the doctor and paid him from his meager funds. Then, with Emma secured in one arm and the other supporting Olivia, he helped them to the hotel across the street. The Riverside Hotel was a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch and clean windows, modest but respectable. Mrs. Daniels, the proprietress, took one look at the bedraggled trio and immediately bustled into action, arranging adjoining rooms and sending for hot water, clean clothes, and food. Poor dears, she clucked, leading them upstairs. Such terrible things happening in this territory lately. But you're safe now. Hunter wondered if that was true. The Sutton Gang wouldn't give up easily, not when Olivia could testify against them. But for now, with a locked door and a loaded gun, it would have to be safe enough. After settling Olivia and Emma in their room, Hunter retreated to his own, the events of the past 24 hours catching up with him in a wave of exhaustion. He sank onto the bed, not bothering to remove his boots, and was asleep within minutes. He awoke to knocking several hours later. Night had fallen, and for a disorienting moment, Hunter couldn't remember where he was. Then it all came rushing back: Olivia, Emma, the Sutton Gang. He opened the door to find Mrs. Daniels with a tray of food. Thought you might be hungry, she said, bustling past him to set it on the small table. Mrs. Zimmerman and the baby are sleeping soundly. Poor thing was exhausted, but her fever's down a bit. Thank you, Hunter said, suddenly aware of his own hunger. The tray held a hearty stew, fresh bread, and coffee, simple fare, but the most appealing meal he'd seen in weeks. Mrs. Daniels watched with approval as he began to eat. Sheriff Taylor came by while you were sleeping. Said to tell you he'll expect you at his office in the morning, and Dr. Monroe left medicine for Mrs. Zimmerman. It's on her nightstand. Hunter nodded gratefully. The kindness of these strangers was a reminder of why towns like Del Rio survived on the harsh frontier. People looked out for each other. After Mrs. Daniels left, Hunter finished his meal, then checked on Olivia and Emma through the connecting door. They were indeed sleeping peacefully, Olivia's color better than it had been. Emma nestled against her side in a makeshift crib formed from drawers and blankets. He stood watching them for a long moment, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. In just one day, these two had somehow worked their way into his heart, awakening feelings he'd thought long buried. It was unsettling, and yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Returning to his own room, Hunter cleaned his guns and checked his ammunition. Whatever came next, he would be ready. The Sutton Gang was still out there, and they had proven themselves both ruthless and persistent. But for the first time in years, Hunter Crawford had found someone worth fighting for. The next morning dawned clear and warm, a typical late summer day in the border country. Hunter rose early, washed up, and went downstairs to arrange for breakfast to be sent to Olivia's room. Then he made his way to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Taylor was already at his desk, sipping coffee and reviewing wanted posters. He looked up as Hunter entered, gesturing to the chair across from him. Crawford. Coffee. Hunter accepted the offered cup, settling into the chair. Any sign of the Suttons? Deputies patrolled all night. No sign yet, but that doesn't mean they're not around. The sheriff set aside his papers. Tell me everything that happened. Hunter recounted the events of the past 2 days, finding Olivia and Emma, the pursuit by the Sutton Gang, the shootout at the line shack. He kept his account factual and concise, the way he'd learned to report during his brief time scouting for the Army after the war. When he finished, Taylor nodded thoughtfully. Matches what little Mrs. Zimmerman was able to tell me yesterday. The Army's sending a detachment from Fort Duncan. Should arrive tomorrow. They're very interested in those missing supplies. What happens now? Hunter asked. We wait for the Army, then organize a proper posse to go after the Suttons. In the meantime, I've deputized extra men to patrol the town. The sheriff studied Hunter with shrewd eyes. Could use someone with your experience if you're willing. Temporary deputy position with pay. The offer surprised Hunter. His relationship with law enforcement had been complicated over the years, never on the wrong side exactly, but not always aligned with it either. What about my history? He asked cautiously. Taylor shrugged. Far as I know, you've never broken the law in my jurisdiction. And that business in Laredo was cleared up, wasn't it? Hunter nodded. The business in Laredo had been a misunderstanding involving cattle rustlers and mistaken identity 3 years earlier. He'd been cleared, but the incident had soured him on Texas for a while. Besides, the sheriff continued, you've already shown you're willing to risk your life for Mrs. Zimmerman and her child. That counts for something in my book. Hunter considered the offer. Taking the position would give him legitimate authority to protect Olivia and Emma, as well as much-needed funds. His savings were dwindling fast. All right, he agreed, until the Sutton business is resolved. Taylor smiled, pushing a deputy's badge across the desk. Welcome aboard, Deputy Crawford. First assignment is to keep Mrs. Zimmerman and her daughter safe. The Riverside Hotel is as good a place as any. You've got the adjoining room already. Hunter pinned the badge to his vest, the weight of it familiar from a brief stint as a deputy in Colorado years before. What about after? Will Mrs. Zimmerman be able to claim her property? If it's legally hers, yes. We'll need to check the records, but assuming everything's in order, she has rights to the land. Taylor's expression grew serious. But between you and me, there might not be much left to go back to. The Suttons are thorough when they destroy something. Hunter had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his heart ache for Olivia. She had lost everything: husband, home, livelihood in one violent sweep. She'll need help rebuilding, he said, more to himself than to Taylor. The sheriff gave him a knowing look. Seems to me she's already found it. Hunter ignored the implication, rising to his feet. I should get back to the hotel, check on Mrs. Zimmerman and the baby. Keep your eyes open, Taylor warned as Hunter reached the door. The Suttons have friends in town. They might try something, even with our patrols. With that warning in mind, Hunter made his way back to the riverside, taking a circuitous route and watching for any signs of surveillance. The town was coming alive with morning activity: shopkeepers opening their doors, women heading to market, cowboys emerging from saloons after a night of carousing. Nothing seemed amiss, but Hunter remained vigilant. At the hotel, he found Olivia sitting up in bed, looking remarkably better than she had the day before. Emma was awake in her makeshift crib, kicking her tiny feet and making soft cooing sounds. The sight of them, safe and recovering, lifted a weight from Hunter's shoulders he hadn't realized was there. Good morning. Olivia greeted him with a smile that transformed her face, bringing a glow to her eyes that made Hunter's breath catch momentarily. "Morning," he replied, removing his hat as he entered the room. "You're looking better." "I feel better. Dr. Monroe's medicine helped, and Mrs. Daniels has been wonderfully kind." She gestured to a tray of food on the bedside table. "She brought enough breakfast for both of us. Will you join me?" Hunter sat in the chair beside the bed, accepting a plate of eggs and bacon. "Sheriff Taylor deputized me," he said, showing her the badge. "Temporary position until the Sutton situation is resolved." Olivia's eyes widened. "Does that mean you're staying in Del Rio?" "For now," Hunter confirmed, suddenly aware of how important her reaction was to him. "My job is to keep you and Emma safe." Relief washed over her face. "I'm glad. I don't know what I would have done if—" She trailed off, looking down at her plate. "You're stronger than you think," Hunter said quietly. "You would have managed." She met his eyes again, a vulnerability in her gaze that tugged at something deep inside him. "Perhaps, but I'm grateful I don't have to find out just yet." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, interrupted occasionally by Emma's babbling. The baby seemed content this morning, well-fed and comfortable in her improvised bed. "The sheriff says the army is sending men from Fort Duncan," Hunter finally said. "They should arrive tomorrow. Once they're here, Taylor will organize a posse to go after the Sutton Gang." Olivia set down her fork, her expression troubled. "And you'll go with them?" "That's the plan," Hunter confirmed. "But you and Emma will be safe here. Taylor's doubled the patrols and Mrs. Daniels seems like she'd fight off the devil himself to protect a guest in her hotel." A small smile crossed Olivia's lips at that. "She does seem formidable, but—" She hesitated. "What happens after, if they catch the Suttons?" It was the question Hunter had been pondering himself. "The sheriff says you should be able to reclaim your land if you want to. It's legally yours." Olivia's gaze drifted to the window, where the morning sun streamed in. "I don't know if I could go back there, not after what happened." Her voice broke slightly. "Thomas is buried there, under the old oak tree where we used to sit in the evenings. But everything else, our home, our future, it's all gone." Hunter wanted to reach for her hand to offer comfort, but held back. "You don't have to decide anything now. First, we deal with the Suttons." She nodded, then looked at him curiously. "What about you? You said you were heading to Mexico before all this. What's waiting for you there?" "Nothing special," Hunter admitted. "Work, maybe. I have some contacts at ranches south of the border. Winter's coming and the weather's milder down there." He shrugged. "Been my pattern for a few years now, north in summer, south in winter. No real home base." "That sounds lonely," Olivia observed softly. Hunter had never thought of it that way. "It's just life," he said. "Been on my own since my family died. Got used to it." "No one should have to get used to being alone," she replied, her eyes searching his face as if seeing beyond the mask he usually presented to the world. Before Hunter could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. He rose quickly, hand moving instinctively to his revolver as he crossed the room. "Who is it?" he called. "Dr. Monroe," came the reply. "Morning check on Mrs. Zimmerman." Hunter relaxed slightly but still opened the door cautiously. The doctor entered, medical bag in hand, nodding a greeting to them both. "Good morning. I see you're looking much improved, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, moving to the bed. "And the little one seems content as well." He examined Olivia's wound, nodding with satisfaction at the reduced inflammation. "The infection is responding to treatment. Another day or two of rest, and you should be well enough for normal activity, though I'd advise against any strenuous exertion for at least a week." As the doctor rebandaged her arm, he glanced at Hunter. "Sheriff Taylor mentioned you've taken a deputy position." "Good. Mrs. Zimmerman and her daughter will need protection until this business with the Suttons is resolved. Hunter nodded, wondering if the entire town was already aware of his new role. In small communities like Del Rio, news traveled faster than telegraph messages. After Dr. Monroe departed, promising to return the following day, Olivia attempted to rise from the bed. "What are you doing?" Hunter asked, moving quickly to her side. "I can't stay in bed all day," she said determinedly. "I need to stretch my legs and Emma needs fresh air. We can't hide in this room forever." Hunter wanted to argue, to insist she stay safely inside, but the stubborn set of her jaw told him it would be futile. Besides, she had a point: they couldn't live in fear indefinitely. "All right," he conceded. "But we stay together, and we don't leave the main streets of town. And you tell me immediately if you feel weak or dizzy." Olivia agreed to his terms, and Hunter stepped outside to allow her privacy to dress. Mrs. Daniels had provided a simple blue calico dress to replace Olivia's ruined garments, along with a shawl for the baby. When Olivia emerged from the room with Emma in her arms, the transformation was striking. Clean and properly clothed, her light brown hair neatly braided and pinned, she looked like a different woman from the desperate, blood-stained figure who had collapsed at his campfire. The blue of the dress brought out the green in her eyes, and though she was still pale from her ordeal, a natural beauty shone through that made Hunter momentarily forget to breathe. "What?" she asked self-consciously when she noticed his stare. "Nothing," he said quickly, offering his arm for support. "You look better." A hint of color touched her cheeks. "Thank you. It feels good to be clean and in proper clothes again." They made their way carefully downstairs and out onto the hotel porch. The September sun was warm but not oppressive, with a gentle breeze carrying the scents of the nearby river and the food cooking in the hotel kitchen. Olivia took a deep breath, closing her eyes momentarily as if savoring the simple pleasure of fresh air. "It's a lovely day." "It is," Hunter agreed, though his attention was more on scanning the street for potential threats than on enjoying the weather. His new deputy's badge gleamed on his vest, a visible declaration of his authority and perhaps a deterrent to anyone considering mischief. They walked slowly along the main street, Hunter's hand never far from his revolver. Olivia nodded politely to people they passed, most of whom regarded them with curious but friendly interest. Emma had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, tiny face peaceful in the sunlight. At the general store, Hunter insisted on going in first to check that all was safe before escorting Olivia inside. The proprietor, a jovial man with impressive whiskers, immediately came forward to greet them. "Mrs. Zimmerman, is it? And the little one? Word spread about your trouble." "Terrible business with the Suttons." He shook his head sympathetically. "Anything you need, just say the word. Sheriff Taylor asked us all to keep an eye out." Olivia thanked him, then began to browse the store's offerings while Hunter kept watch near the door. She selected a few necessities: baby clothes for Emma, a hairbrush, simple toiletries, all of which Hunter insisted on paying for despite her protests. "You can repay me when things are settled," he told her firmly. "For now, let me help." They continued their walk after leaving the store, passing the bank, the post office, and several other businesses before Olivia began to tire. Hunter noticed her steps slowing and the slight pallor returning to her face. "Time to head back," he said, no room for argument in his tone. She nodded, clearly exhausted but reluctant to admit it. "Just a little further. There's a park by the river I'd like to see." Hunter hesitated, then agreed. "Just for a few minutes, then you need to rest." The small park was a pleasant green space with benches overlooking the Rio Grande. Cottonwood trees provided dappled shade and wildflowers grew along the pathways. They found an empty bench, and Olivia sank onto it gratefully, adjusting Emma in her arms. "It's peaceful here," she said softly, gazing out at the flowing water. "Hard to believe there's danger not far away." Hunter remained standing, eyes constantly moving, watching for any sign of threat. "Appearances can be deceiving." "Is that how you've lived? Always watching for danger?" Olivia asked, looking up at him with genuine curiosity. The question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked him about his vigilance before. It was simply part of who he was, especially after the war. "I suppose so," he admitted. "Learned young that letting your guard down can get you killed." "That's a hard lesson," Olivia said. "I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. It was different. My father was a schoolteacher. The biggest danger we faced was being late for Sunday service." A shadow crossed her face. "I was naive when Thomas and I came west. I thought adventure would be exciting." "And now?" Hunter asked. "Now I know the difference between adventure in dime novels and real danger." She looked down at Emma, stroking the baby's cheek gently. "But I don't regret coming west. If we hadn't, I wouldn't have Emma. And despite everything, there's a freedom here I never felt back east." Hunter understood that sentiment. The frontier had its dangers, but also offered possibilities unavailable in the more settled regions, a chance to reinvent oneself, to build something new from nothing. "What about you?" Olivia continued. "If you could settle somewhere, where would it be?" The question startled him. He hadn't thought about settling permanently in years. "Never gave it much consideration," he said honestly. "Maybe somewhere with good horse country. Montana territory, perhaps, or back to Colorado, not Texas." "Texas has its charms," Hunter admitted, his gaze lingering on her face before he caught himself and looked away. "But it's getting crowded in some parts." Olivia smiled, seeming to sense the unspoken in his words. "And you prefer open spaces?" "Always have." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the river flowing steadily before them, birds calling from the trees overhead. Hunter found himself relaxing slightly, drawn into the peaceful moment despite his usual vigilance. It was that momentary lapse in attention that nearly cost them everything. The shot came without warning, kicking up dirt just inches from their feet. Hunter reacted instantly, drawing his gun with one hand while pulling Olivia and Emma down with the other, shielding them with his body. "Stay down," he ordered, scanning the area for the shooter. A second shot splintered the wood of the bench where they'd been sitting moments before. Hunter spotted movement in the brush across the river, a glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel. He fired twice in rapid succession, forcing the shooter to take cover. "We need to move," he told Olivia, who was clutching Emma protectively, her face pale with fear. "Stay low, head for those rocks." They scrambled toward a formation of large boulders that would provide better cover, Hunter firing again to keep the shooter's head down. They reached safety just as another bullet ricocheted off the stone beside them. "It's one of the Suttons," Hunter said grimly, reloading his revolver. "Probably Jake himself, from the accuracy of those shots." Olivia's breathing was rapid, her eyes wide with terror, but she maintained her composure, keeping Emma sheltered against her chest. The baby had awakened and was beginning to cry, frightened by the noise and sudden movement. Hunter assessed their situation quickly. They were pinned down, with at least 60 yards of open ground between them and the nearest building. The shooter had the advantage of position, and a rifle with better range than Hunter's revolver. As if confirming his assessment, another shot hit the rocks above their heads, sending fragments of stone raining down on them. Hunter shielded Olivia and Emma with his body, feeling a sharp sting as a stone shard cut his cheek. "When I start shooting, I need you to run," he told Olivia, his voice low and urgent. Head straight for the hotel. Don't stop. Don't look back. She stared at him in horror. But you'll be exposed. I'll be right behind you, he promised, though they both knew it might be a lie. Emma needs you safe. Tears filled Olivia's eyes, but she nodded, understanding the harsh reality of their situation. She clutched Emma tighter, preparing to run. Ready? Hunter asked, checking his ammunition one last time. Hunter, Olivia said quickly, her voice trembling. If something happens, nothing's going to happen, he interrupted firmly. On the count of 3, 1, 2. Before he could say 3, gunfire erupted from the town side of the park, but it wasn't aimed at them. Someone was shooting at the position across the river where the Sutton Gang member was hiding. Sheriff's men, Hunter realized with relief, recognizing the distinctive report of the Winchester rifles carried by Taylor's deputies. Within moments, several horsemen appeared, riding hard toward the river, firing as they came. The shooter across the water was now caught in crossfire, his position compromised. Stay here, Hunter ordered Olivia, then moved to a better vantage point where he could join the fight. The battle was brief, but intense. The Sutton Gang member Hunter still couldn't be certain if it was Jake, himself managed to mount a horse hidden in the brush and flee southward along the river, pursued by 2 of Taylor's deputies. When the shooting stopped, Sheriff Taylor himself approached their position, his expression grim. "You two all right?" he asked, holstering his revolver as Hunter helped Olivia to her feet. "We're unharmed," Hunter confirmed, though his cheek was bleeding from the stone fragment. "Good timing." "One of the shopkeepers heard the first shot and sent for us," Taylor explained. "Looks like Jake Sutton decided to try a direct approach. Foolish in broad daylight, but he's getting desperate." "Did your men catch him?" Olivia asked, attempting to soothe the still crying Emma. Taylor shook his head. "He knows this terrain too well, but we'll find him. The army detachment arrived early. They're setting up now at the north end of town. With their help, we'll start a proper manhunt tomorrow." He studied Hunter with narrowed eyes. "You were supposed to be keeping them safe, Deputy." "My fault," Olivia interjected quickly. "I insisted on coming outside. Hunter advised against it." The sheriff's expression softened somewhat. "Well, no harm done, I suppose, but you'd best stay in the hotel until this is over, both of you." He fixed Hunter with a pointed look. "No exceptions this time." Hunter nodded grimly, accepting the rebuke. He'd allowed himself to become distracted, and it had nearly ended in disaster. It wouldn't happen again. With an escort of deputies, they returned to the Riverside Hotel, where Mrs. Daniels fussed over them, bringing hot tea and bandages for Hunter's cut cheek. By the time they were settled in Olivia's room, Emma had calmed somewhat, though she remained fussy and clingy. "I'm sorry," Olivia said quietly as she sat on the edge of the bed, rocking Emma gently. "I shouldn't have insisted on going out. I put us all in danger." Hunter shook his head, wincing slightly as Mrs. Daniels applied antiseptic to his cut. "You couldn't have known, and you needed fresh air." Still, the sheriff was right. We should have stayed here. She looked down at Emma, who had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep. "I can't risk her life again. She's all I have left." The vulnerability in her voice tugged at Hunter's heart. "You both deserve a normal life, not being trapped by fear. Once the Suttons are dealt with, you'll have that again." Mrs. Daniels finished tending to his cut and departed with a stern admonishment to stay put this time, leaving them alone with the sleeping baby. "What kind of normal life?" Olivia asked softly after the door closed. "My home is destroyed, my husband is dead, and I have no family left in Ohio to return to." She shook her head, a hint of her inherent strength returning to her voice. "But we'll manage, Emma and I, somehow." Hunter watched her for a long moment, admiring her resilience. In the short time he'd known her, Olivia Zimmerman had demonstrated more courage and determination than many men he'd ridden with over the years. "You could rebuild," he suggested. "Your ranch, I mean, if the land is still yours." "With what money?" she asked practically. "And who would help a woman alone with a baby?" Hunter hesitated, then said what he'd been thinking since that morning. "I would." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. "You, if you wanted," he added quickly, suddenly uncertain. "I've got some experience with ranch work and building. Helped my pa construct our house back in Colorado." He shrugged, feeling uncharacteristically self-conscious. "Just an idea." "But you were heading to Mexico," Olivia reminded him. "You said you had contacts there, work waiting." "Plans change," Hunter said simply. The look Olivia gave him was complex, hopeful, cautious, and something else he couldn't quite define. "Why would you do that?" she asked softly. "You barely know us." Hunter struggled to articulate feelings he was only beginning to understand himself. "Because sometimes you find something worth changing plans for," he finally said. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge fully. Olivia's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked down at Emma, smoothing the baby's fine hair with gentle fingers. "Let's see what happens with the Suttons first," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we can talk about plans." Hunter nodded, accepting the wisdom in her caution. They had known each other only days under extraordinary circumstances. Whatever was growing between them needed time and normal conditions to be properly examined. "I should check in with Taylor, see what the plan is for tomorrow," he said, rising from his chair. "Will you be all right here alone?" "We'll be fine," Olivia assured him. "Mrs. Daniels said she'd bring dinner up, and Dr. Monroe is coming back this evening." Hunter hesitated at the door. "I'll lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone except Mrs. Daniels or the doctor, and make sure you know it's them before you unlock it." Olivia smiled faintly at his protectiveness. "I'll be careful, Deputy Crawford." The use of his title with a hint of teasing in her voice made him smile in return, a rare expression for him that transformed his usually stern features. "I won't be long," he promised. At the sheriff's office, Hunter found Taylor and several deputies gathered around a map with 2 Army officers. They looked up as he entered, and the sheriff waved him over. "Crawford, this is Captain Reynolds and Lieutenant Davis from Fort Duncan." "Gentlemen, Deputy Crawford is the one who brought Mrs. Zimmerman safely to town." The officers nodded acknowledgement, and Captain Reynolds gestured to the map. "We were just discussing strategy for tomorrow. The Sutton Gang has a hideout somewhere in this region." He indicated an area of rough country about 20 miles north of Del Rio. "According to information from Mrs. Zimmerman via Sheriff Taylor, that's where they're likely storing the stolen Army supplies before moving them across the border." "We'll be leading a joint operation with Sheriff Taylor's men," Lieutenant Davis added. "2 prongs, one group will approach from the south, the other from the east. We leave at first light." Hunter studied the map, noting the terrain features. "There's an old mining trail here," he said, pointing to a thin line that skirted a ridge. "Used it once when I was scouting for the Army. It's not on most maps, but it would give a small group a covered approach from the west." Captain Reynolds raised an eyebrow, clearly reassessing his initial impression of the dusty deputy. "You know the area well." "Spent some time up that way a few years back," Hunter confirmed. "The trail's probably overgrown now, but it's there." The captain exchanged glances with Taylor, who nodded slightly. "Might be worth sending a small team that way," the sheriff suggested. "Element of surprise could be valuable." "You'll lead that team, Crawford," Reynolds decided. "Take 2 men, your choice from either my soldiers or the sheriff's deputies." Hunter nodded, mentally selecting candidates for the dangerous mission. "Deputy Wilson knows how to move quietly," he said, naming one of Taylor's more experienced men. "And if you have a good scout among your soldiers, Captain, I'd take him as the third." "Corporal Ray's," Lieutenant Davis suggested. "Best tracker in the company." "It's settled then," Captain Reynolds said, making notes on a small pad. "Main force leaves at dawn. Crawford's team will depart 2 hours earlier to get into position." He rolled up the map. "Questions?" Hunter had only one. "What about Mrs. Zimmerman and her child? They won't be safe alone while we're all out hunting the Suttons." "Already arranged," Sheriff Taylor assured him. "Mrs. Daniels has a shotgun and knows how to use it, and I'm leaving Deputy Harris in town. He'll keep an eye on the hotel." Hunter wasn't entirely satisfied with this arrangement, but knew it was the best they could manage with limited resources. "One more thing," he said. "If Jake Sutton isn't with the main group at the hideout, we need to assume he might make another attempt on Mrs. Zimmerman here in town." "Noted," Reynolds said grimly. "All the more reason to move quickly and decisively tomorrow. Catch them all at once if possible." As the meeting concluded and the others filed out, Sheriff Taylor held Hunter back with a hand on his arm. "I know that look, Crawford," he said quietly. "You're worried about leaving the Zimmerman woman and her baby." Hunter didn't deny it. "Jake Sutton's clever. He might anticipate our move tomorrow. Harris is a good man. He'll keep them safe." Taylor studied him with knowing eyes. "Unless there's another reason you're reluctant to leave them," Hunter maintained an impassive expression. "Just doing my job, Sheriff." Taylor's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Sure you are," he clapped Hunter on the shoulder. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." When Hunter returned to the hotel, he found Olivia sitting in a rocking chair by the window, singing softly to Emma. The scene was so peaceful, so domestic, that he paused in the doorway, reluctant to interrupt. Olivia looked up and smiled when she noticed him. "Everything's set for tomorrow?" she asked, her voice hushed to avoid disturbing the drowsing infant. Hunter nodded, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "We leave before dawn. Main force will follow later." He hesitated, then added, "I might be gone a couple of days." Concern flickered across Olivia's face. "Is it dangerous, what you'll be doing?" "It's always dangerous dealing with men like the Suttons," Hunter admitted. "But we have good men, and the element of surprise." He didn't tell her about his specific role, that he would be leading a small team on the riskiest approach. She had enough to worry about. "Deputy Harris will be watching the hotel while we're gone," he continued. "And Mrs. Daniels seems capable of handling trouble." Olivia nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said softly. "Emma and we've come to depend on you." The simple admission warmed Hunter in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "I'll be back," he promised, "and then we can talk about those plans we mentioned." A faint blush colored Olivia's cheeks, but she held his gaze steadily. "I'd like that." They remained like that for a long moment, unspoken feelings flowing between them, until Emma stirred and broke the spell. Olivia turned her attention back to the baby, adjusting her position in her arms. "You should get some sleep," she told Hunter, "if you're leaving before dawn." He nodded, reluctant to go but knowing she was right. "Lock the door behind me," he reminded her as he stepped into the hallway. "I'll check on you before I leave in the morning." Sleep came fitfully to Hunter that night. His mind kept returning to Olivia and Emma, to the possibility of a life he'd never dared imagine for himself. He'd been alone for so long, convinced that solitude was his natural state. But in just a few days, these two had awakened something long dormant within him, a yearning for connection, for family. It was frightening in its intensity, this sudden shift in his perception of his own future. Yet beneath the fear lay a quiet certainty that had been building since the moment Olivia stumbled into his camp, wounded and desperate, trusting him with her most precious possession, her child. "Please save my baby," she had begged him. And in saving them both, Hunter Crawford had found something worth saving in himself. Dawn was just a faint promise on the eastern horizon when Hunter rose and prepared for the mission ahead. He checked his weapons methodically, packed spare ammunition and minimal provisions, and dressed in the darkest clothing he owned to blend with the shadows. Before meeting Deputy Wilson and Corporal Reyes at the livery stable, he knocked softly on Olivia's door. There was a pause, then the sound of the lock turning. Olivia stood before him in a borrowed nightgown and shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. Even in the dim light of the single lamp she'd lit, Hunter could see the concern in her eyes. "You're leaving now?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. He nodded. "Should be back by tomorrow evening if all goes well." Olivia hesitated, then stepped forward and placed her hand lightly on his chest over his heart. "Be safe," she whispered. Hunter covered her hand with his own, savoring the warmth of her touch. "Take care of yourself and Emma. Stay in the hotel." "I will." They stood there for a moment longer, neither willing to break the connection. Then, acting on impulse, Hunter leaned down and pressed his lips gently to hers in a brief, tender kiss. Olivia's eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she rose on tiptoe to return the kiss, her fingers curling slightly against his chest. When they parted, both were breathing faster, and Hunter felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. "I'll be back," he promised again, his voice rough with emotion. Olivia nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We'll be waiting." Hunter met Wilson and Reyes at the livery as planned, and the three men rode out of town in the gray pre-dawn light. They traveled in silence, each focused on the dangerous task ahead. The plan was simple, but risky. They would approach the suspected Sutton hideout from the west via the old mining trail, get as close as possible without being detected, and wait for the signal from the main force before moving in. The sun was fully up by the time they reached the beginning of the overgrown trail Hunter remembered. As he had suspected, it was barely visible now, reclaimed by nature in the years since he'd last used it. But it was still passable, winding its way through dense underbrush and around rocky outcroppings that provided excellent cover. They dismounted and proceeded on foot, leading their horses when they were within a mile of the suspected hideout. Corporal Reyes, proving his reputation as an excellent tracker, moved ahead slightly, reading signs in the disturbed earth and broken vegetation that confirmed recent activity in the area. "Multiple horses," he reported in a whisper when they paused behind a large boulder. "Heavy wagons, too. Someone's been using this area regularly." Hunter nodded grimly. It matched what Olivia had told them about the army supplies being moved through the region. They continued their cautious approach until they reached a vantage point overlooking a small valley. Below, partially concealed among trees and rock formations, stood a collection of crude buildings, a main cabin, several smaller structures, and a large barn or storage building. 4 horses were visible in a corral, and smoke rose from the cabin's chimney. "That's it," Hunter whispered, surveying the scene through his spyglass. "I count 2 men visible, one by the corral, one on the porch of the main cabin." "Sutton?" Wilson asked. Hunter adjusted the spyglass, focusing on the man seated on the porch. "Can't tell from here, but the build matches Jake Sutton's description." They settled into their observation post, keeping track of movement in the hideout while waiting for the main force to arrive. Hours passed slowly, the sun climbing higher in the sky, bringing with it the heat of the Texas day. Hunter's thoughts occasionally strayed to Olivia and Emma, back in Del Rio, but he forced himself to maintain his focus. Lives depended on his vigilance. Around midday, they observed increased activity at the hideout. 2 more men emerged from the main cabin, and the 4 outlaws appeared to be preparing for something, checking weapons, saddling horses. "They know we're coming," Wilson muttered. "Someone must have tipped them off." Hunter frowned, considering their options. The main force, led by Captain Reynolds and Sheriff Taylor, wouldn't arrive for at least another hour. If the Sutton Gang fled before then, they might escape the carefully planned trap. "We need to delay them," he decided. "Rays, work your way around to the south side of the valley. When you're in position, take a shot at that storage building. Make them think the attack is coming from that direction. Wilson and I will be ready to pick off anyone who makes a run for the North Trail." The corporal nodded and disappeared silently into the underbrush. Hunter and Wilson repositioned themselves to cover the most likely escape routes, rifles ready. 20 minutes later, a single shot echoed through the valley. As Hunter had anticipated, the sudden attack from an unexpected direction threw the Sutton Gang into momentary confusion. They dove for cover, returning fire toward the south, while trying to determine the size of the force opposing them. Rays maintained the illusion skillfully, firing from different positions to suggest multiple attackers. Meanwhile, Hunter and Wilson remained hidden, watching and waiting. The strategy worked initially. The outlaws stayed put, unwilling to abandon their hideout without knowing what they faced. But Jake Sutton, if it was indeed him on the porch, was too clever to be contained for long. After a brief conference with his men, he dispatched 2 of them to circle around to the south while he and the remaining outlaw prepared to flee northward. "Get ready," Hunter whispered to Wilson as they watched the 2 men mount their horses. "Let them clear the buildings before you fire. We want them in the open." The deputy nodded, steadying his rifle against a rock. As the riders emerged from the cover of the hideout, heading for the North Trail, Wilson took careful aim and fired. His shot struck the trailing rider in the shoulder, knocking him from his horse. Hunter targeted the lead rider, Jake Sutton, but the outlaw leader was already reacting, throwing himself to the side of his horse in a practiced move that made him a difficult target. Hunter's shot missed by inches. Sutton returned fire in their general direction, bullets whining off the rocks around them as he urged his horse into the cover of the trees. "He's getting away," Wilson exclaimed, preparing to pursue. "Stay here," Hunter ordered. "Cover Rays. I'll go after Sutton." Without waiting for a response, he scrambled down from their position, mounted his waiting horse, and took off after the fleeing outlaw leader. The pursuit was dangerous. Sutton knew the terrain and was riding hard, occasionally turning to fire at Hunter. But Hunter was equally determined, guided by the fresh tracks and broken vegetation left by the fleeing horse. The chase led them further north, away from the hideout and the approaching main force. Hunter lost sight of Sutton several times, but always managed to pick up his trail again. As they entered a narrow canyon, he sensed they were approaching a decisive moment. The canyon had limited exits. If he could close the gap before Sutton reached the other end, he might trap the outlaw. Hunter pushed his horse harder, gaining ground. Ahead he caught glimpses of Sutton's dust, then the outlaw himself, his horse beginning to tire. The distance between them narrowed to 50 yards, then 30. Sutton twisted in his saddle, firing wildly. Hunter ducked low over his horse's neck, returning fire when he could. Neither man scored a hit, but Hunter's last shot must have come close because Sutton suddenly swerved, his horse stumbling on the uneven ground. It was the break Hunter needed. As Sutton struggled to control his mount, Hunter closed the final distance between them. He launched himself from his saddle, tackling the outlaw and sending them both crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs and dust. They rolled, each fighting for advantage. Sutton was strong and vicious, landing several painful blows before Hunter managed to pin him. Even then, the outlaw leader continued to struggle, his face contorted with rage. "It's over, Sutton," Hunter growled, pressing his forearm against the man's throat. "The army's coming for your hideout and your men are already captured or dead. You think this ends with me?" Sutton snarled, his eyes burning with hatred. "I've got friends all over this territory. That woman and her brat won't last a week once word gets out she's still alive." The threat against Olivia and Emma ignited a cold fury in Hunter. He pressed harder on Sutton's throat, tempted to end the threat permanently. But the badge on his vest reminded him of his duty. With an effort, he controlled his anger and dragged Sutton to his feet, quickly binding the outlaw's hands with a leather thong from his saddlebag. "You're done threatening innocent women and children," Hunter said, his voice deadly calm. "The only place you're going is a hangman's noose." He secured Sutton to his horse, then mounted his own. The journey back to the hideout was tense, with Sutton alternatively threatening and attempting to bargain for his freedom. Hunter ignored him, his thoughts now turning to Olivia and Emma. He needed to get back to Del Rio as soon as possible to ensure they were safe. When they reached the hideout, they found the operation had been a complete success. The main force had arrived shortly after Hunter's pursuit of Sutton began, capturing the remaining gang members and securing the stolen army supplies hidden in the storage building. Sheriff Taylor and Captain Reynolds were organizing the prisoners and evidence when Hunter rode in with Sutton. "Crawford," Taylor called, clearly relieved to see him. "Wilson told us you went after Sutton alone. Damn fool move, but I see it paid off." Hunter dismounted, handing Sutton over to waiting soldiers. "Did you get them all?" he asked. Reynolds nodded. "5 in total, including Sutton, and we found enough stolen army supplies to hang them all twice over." He studied Hunter with newfound respect. That was good work with the diversion. "Kept them pinned down until we arrived." "Reyes and Wilson deserve the credit," Hunter said, already thinking ahead to his return to Del Rio. "Any word from town?" "Everything's still quiet there, as far as we know," Taylor assured him, "but we'll head back as soon as we've secured the prisoners." Should reach town by nightfall. Hunter wasn't willing to wait that long. "With your permission, Sheriff, I'd like to ride ahead, make sure everything's still secure at the hotel." Taylor gave him a knowing look but nodded. "Go on, we'll handle things here." The ride back to Del Rio was the longest of Hunter's life, despite pushing his horse as fast as he dared. The sun was lowering toward the western horizon by the time he reached the outskirts of town. Everything appeared normal, people going about their business, no sign of trouble. He rode directly to the Riverside Hotel, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped and taking the porch steps 2 at a time. Inside, Mrs. Daniels looked up in surprise from her position behind the front desk. "Deputy Crawford, we weren't expecting you back until tomorrow, Mrs. Zimmerman and the baby, are they all right?" Hunter asked, unable to hide his concern. "Of course they are," Mrs. Daniels assured him, though something in her expression gave him pause. "They're upstairs. Deputy Harris checked on them not 30 minutes ago." Hunter didn't wait to hear more, taking the stairs quickly to reach Olivia's room. He knocked, then called through the door. "Olivia, it's Hunter." There was no immediate response, which sent a chill through him. He knocked again, louder this time. "Olivia, Emma." The door of his own room opened instead, and Deputy Harris emerged, looking surprised. "Crawford, thought you were with the posse." "Where are they?" Hunter demanded, gesturing to Olivia's closed door. Harris frowned. "The lady and her baby, they're not here. Left about 2 hours ago with that drummer who's been staying down the hall." "What drummer? What are you talking about?" Hunter felt a growing dread in the pit of his stomach. Fella selling sewing machines. Been here 3 days. Said he was heading to San Antonio and offered Mrs. Zimmerman a ride in his wagon, safer than waiting around for the Sutton business to be resolved. Harris shrugged. Seemed reasonable. She left a note for you with Mrs. Daniels. Hunter turned and raced back downstairs, his heart pounding. The note, he demanded of the startled proprietress. From Mrs. Zimmerman. Oh, yes, of course. Mrs. Daniels produced a folded piece of paper from beneath the desk and handed it to him. Hunter unfolded it quickly, recognizing Olivia's handwriting. Hunter, Mr. Andrews has kindly offered to escort Emma and me to San Antonio, where I have a distant cousin who might take us in. I cannot ask you to change your plans for us, especially when the threat of the Sutton still hangs over our heads. Please know that I will always be grateful for all you've done. With sincere regards, Olivia Zimmerman. Something about the note felt wrong. The formal tone, so different from their last intimate conversation. The mention of a cousin she'd never spoken of before. And most of all, the decision to leave with a stranger when Hunter had explicitly asked her to wait for his return. This drummer, Andrews, what did he look like? Hunter asked Mrs. Daniels urgently. Tall gentleman, well-dressed, had a mustache and spectacles, very polite. She frowned at Hunter's expression. Is something wrong? Which way did they go, exactly? The San Antonio road, I assume, Harris interjected. That's what they said. Hunter was already moving toward the door. Get a message to Sheriff Taylor when he returns. Tell him I believe Olivia and Emma Zimmerman have been taken against their will, possibly by an associate of the Sutton Gang. I'm going after them. But Crawford, Harris protested, you can't know that for certain. The lady seemed willing enough. The Suttons have friends all over this territory, Jake's own words, Hunter said grimly. This drummer could be one of them, and Olivia would never willingly leave, not after. He stopped, unwilling to explain the personal nature of their parting. Just get word to Taylor. Without waiting for a response, he hurried back to his exhausted horse. The poor animal couldn't take another hard ride, not so soon. Hunter led it to the livery stable, where he quickly arranged to exchange it for a fresh mount, a sturdy black gelding that looked to have good stamina. Within minutes, he was galloping north on the San Antonio road, praying he wasn't too late. The sun was setting now, painting the western sky in fierce oranges and reds. Soon it would be dark, making tracking nearly impossible. He had to find them before nightfall. 2 miles outside of town, Hunter spotted fresh wagon tracks turning off the main road onto a less traveled trail that led west, not north toward San Antonio. His suspicions confirmed, he followed the tracks, pushing his horse as fast as he dared in the fading light. The trail led toward the river, where numerous small canyons and caves provided hiding places for those who knew the terrain. Hunter slowed as he approached a narrow ravine, drawing his revolver. If the drummer was indeed connected to the Sutton Gang, he would be armed and dangerous, and now had Olivia and Emma as hostages. As Hunter rounded a bend in the ravine, he spotted a wagon partially concealed among some cottonwood trees. A small campfire burned nearby, and beside it sat a man in a city suit, the supposed drummer, Andrews. Of Olivia and Emma, there was no immediate sign. Hunter dismounted quietly, tethering his horse out of sight, and approached on foot, staying in the shadows of the ravine walls. As he drew closer, he could make out 2 more figures, Olivia seated on a fallen log, Emma clutched tightly in her arms. Even from a distance, Hunter could see the tension in her posture, the way she leaned away from Andrews, who was speaking to her in low tones. Hunter circled carefully to get within earshot without being seen. Don't understand why we had to leave the main road, Olivia was saying, her voice strained but controlled. San Antonio is north, not west. Andrews laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Drop the act, Mrs. Zimmerman. You're smart enough to have figured it out by now. We're not going to San Antonio. Then where are you taking us? Her voice remained steady, though Hunter could hear the fear beneath her composure. That depends on Jake, Andrews replied, poking at the fire with a stick. If he got away clean, we'll meet him at the border crossing. If not, he shrugged. Well, let's just say I have instructions for that scenario too. Olivia clutched Emma closer. What do you want with us? The ranch is already destroyed, my husband is dead, there's nothing left to take. It's not about taking, Mrs. Zimmerman. It's about making sure certain stories don't get told. Andrews set aside the stick and reached for something in his jacket. Jake was very specific: no witnesses to connect the gang to those army supplies. Hunter had heard enough. Moving silently around the perimeter of the small camp, he positioned himself behind a large boulder with a clear line of sight to Andrews. The false drummer had produced a revolver from his jacket and was checking its chambers, his intentions clear. Andrews. Hunter called out, his own weapon aimed steadily at the man's chest. Drop the gun and step away from Mrs. Zimmerman and her child. Andrews froze momentarily, then recovered his composure, smiling coldly. Deputy Crawford, Jake said you might be a problem. In a swift motion, he grabbed Olivia's arm, pulling her in front of him as a shield, the gun pressed to her temple. Emma began to wail in terror. Let them go, Hunter demanded, his voice deadly calm despite the fear coursing through him. It's over. Jake Sutton and the rest of the gang are in custody. The army supplies have been recovered. There's nowhere for you to run. Maybe not, Andrews acknowledged, but I can still finish what Jake started. He pressed the gun harder against Olivia's head, making her wince. Put down your weapon, Crawford, or I'll kill her right now. Hunter maintained his aim, assessing the situation rapidly. Andrews was using Olivia as cover, but his right shoulder and part of his head remained exposed. It would be a difficult shot, especially in the failing light, but Hunter had made more challenging ones during the war. Last chance, he told Andrews evenly. Release them, or I'll put a bullet through your skull. You won't risk hitting her, Andrews scoffed, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. Hunter's eyes met Olivia's over the distance separating them. In that moment, a silent communication passed between them: trust, determination, and something deeper that gave Hunter the confidence he needed. Olivia, he said quietly, do you remember what I promised you this morning? Understanding dawned in her eyes. That you'd be back, she whispered. And I keep my promises, Hunter replied. Then, to Andrews, you should have checked the note she left more carefully. She never calls me Hunter, it's always Mr. Crawford. The momentary confusion that crossed Andrews' face was all the opening Hunter needed. As the false drummer's grip on Olivia loosened slightly, she dropped to her knees, shielding Emma with her body. Hunter fired once. Andrews crumpled to the ground, the bullet finding its mark with deadly precision. He was dead before he hit the dirt, his unfired revolver falling from limp fingers. For a moment, the only sound was Emma's frightened crying. Then Hunter was moving, crossing the distance to Olivia in long strides, holstering his weapon as he reached her. Are you hurt? He asked urgently, helping her to her feet, his hands gentle as they checked her for injuries. Olivia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, we're all right. He forced us to come with him. Said he'd hurt Emma if I didn't write the note exactly as he dictated. Her voice broke. I was so afraid you wouldn't understand, that you'd think I'd left willingly. I knew something was wrong the moment I read it, Hunter assured her, pulling her and Emma against his chest in a protective embrace. No cousin in San Antonio formal language that didn't sound like you. He pressed his lips to her forehead. And there was our conversation this morning. I knew you wouldn't leave after that. Olivia looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and something warmer. You came for us, she whispered. Again. Always will, Hunter promised, the words coming easily now, his heart finally unguarded. As long as you want me to. I want that very much, Olivia admitted softly. For both of us. She glanced down at Emma, who had quieted in the safety of their shared embrace. The future Hunter had begun to imagine that morning suddenly seemed possible, more than possible. It felt right. This woman and this child who had stumbled into his solitary existence just days ago had somehow become essential to his happiness. Let's go home, he said, guiding her toward the wagon. Sheriff Taylor and the others should be back in Del Rio by now. You'll both be safe there while we sort out what happens next. As they traveled back to town under the emerging stars, Olivia leaned against Hunter's shoulder, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. The danger was truly over now. Jake Sutton and his gang would face justice, and the threat they posed was eliminated. What do you think happens next? Olivia asked softly, echoing his earlier words. For us, I mean. Hunter considered the question, his arm around her shoulders, keeping her steady as the wagon rumbled along the trail. That depends on what you want, he said finally. Your land is still yours if you want to rebuild there, or you could sell it, start fresh somewhere else. And where would you be in either of those scenarios? Her voice was hesitant, as if she feared his answer. Hunter turned slightly to meet her gaze in the starlight. Wherever you and Emma are, he said simply. If you'll have me. The smile that illuminated Olivia's face was answer enough, but she put it into words anyway. We would like that very much, Mr. Crawford. He chuckled at her deliberate formality. I think after everything you can call me Hunter now. Hunter, she agreed, her voice warm with affection. Then, more softly, I think I might be falling in love with you. The admission, so honestly given, filled Hunter with a joy he hadn't expected to experience again in this lifetime. I know I'm already in love with you, he confessed. Both of you. Under the vast Texas sky, with the woman he loved and her child beside him, Hunter Crawford finally understood what he'd been searching for in all his years of wandering. Not a place, but a feeling of belonging, of purpose, of home. 3 months later, on a clear December morning, Hunter Crawford and Olivia Zimmerman were married in the small church in Del Rio. Emma, now 7 months old and growing stronger by the day, watched the proceedings from the arms of Mrs. Daniels, who had become a dear friend and unofficial grandmother to the child. Sheriff Taylor stood as Hunter's best man, while Dr. Monroe's wife attended Olivia. The small congregation included many townspeople who had come to know and respect the couple during their time in Del Rio. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch land that had once belonged to Olivia and her first husband. With the compensation she had received from the Army for information leading to the recovery of their stolen supplies, combined with Hunter's savings and his skills as a builder, they had constructed a new house, smaller than the original but solid and warm. The barn had been rebuilt first, providing shelter for Ranger and the 2 additional horses Hunter had purchased to start their stock. In the spring, they would add cattle, beginning the process of building the ranch into a viable operation. As evening fell on their wedding day, Hunter sat with Olivia on the porch of their new home. Emma sleeping contentedly in a cradle Hunter had crafted from cedar wood, just as Thomas Zimmerman had done before him. The ache of loss would always be part of Olivia's story, but now it was balanced by new joy and hope. Happy? Hunter asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders as they watched the sunset paint the western sky. Very, Olivia confirmed, leaning into his embrace. Though I still can't quite believe how our lives have changed in such a short time. 3 months ago, I thought I had lost everything. And I thought I would always be alone, Hunter added, remembering his solitary camp where a desperate young mother had appeared with her infant daughter, begging him to save her baby. In taking them both under his protection, he had found his true purpose not as a drifter or a lone gunman, but as a husband, a father, a builder of something lasting. What do you think the future holds for us? Olivia asked, gazing out at the land that stretched before them, land that would provide for their family in the years to come. Hunter considered the question, feeling the solid weight of the wedding ring on his finger, the warmth of his wife beside him, the peaceful presence of the child who had already claimed his heart as surely as if she were his own by blood. "Whatever comes," he said with quiet certainty, "we'll face it together." And as night fell over the Texas frontier, Hunter Crawford knew he had finally found what he had been searching for all his life, not in some distant place or future adventure, but right here, with the woman and child who had become his reason for being. The stranger who had once been asked to save a baby had become their shield, their protector, their family. And in that role, he had discovered his own salvation.